just a little bit of background about myself. You did a great job of reading what Charlie did a great job of kind of presenting me in a brilliant light. And by the way, thank you for having me, and thank you all for taking a little bit of time to come out here. I appreciate it. So, yes, I am. I don't even know how to name my jobs. I'm the director of the Prairie Ronde Artist Residency, which is under the big umbrella of the mill at Vicksburg. I work as a liaison between the mill and local schools, and I do a fair amount of marketing and branding work with the mill with our firm in Grand Rapids. Is this going too quickly? It feels like it might be going a bit quickly. I'll slow this down.
Requires constant attention.
That was actually kind of my plan. But because you mentioned, I'll slow down. Big babies. So, background. I am originally from Muskegon Heights. I graduated in 1988 from Michigan State with a degree in telecommunications, which is right in keeping with, I guess, now what I'm doing. After a short stint of doing what Khalid is doing right now, my freelance business collapsed and I wound up in education school, and I wound up then at Augsburg College in Minneapolis, and I got a degree in education. Went on then and did additional master's work at Western Washington University and at the University of Washington in Seattle. So, long story short, I taught for about 27 years and have been able to kind of parlay that into this work at the mill. How's that work? How do you get engaged with all of this mess? Well, let me give you a little bit of my background. I was educated in a progressive educational philosophy. And that means then that I worked with a lot of experiential learning, a lot of project-based learning, and a lot of place-based learning. In fact, briefly, when I was doing master's work with Western Washington, theirs was a new program in place-based learning, and I, with my experience, wound up actually helping them write their university curriculum for a bit. And that's how you wind up stopping a master's program, when you realize that you're paying to actually teach the teachers. Anyway, so I worked extensively in outdoor education and parlayed all of this place-based learning. Let me give you a little bit of a definition of place-based learning, and I kind of wrote it out for myself, so forgive the top of my head. But place-based education is a philosophy designed to utilize the history, geography, environment, art, and culture of a place where learners are located in that place are able to then create authentic learning experiences from the place. And so I parlayed that then into educating people. I lived in Seattle for over 15 years, and I parlayed that philosophy then into taking learners into salmon habitat and taking middle schoolers into the back country and backpacking with them. I wrote a curriculum with the same school that I was working at that created an opportunity for middle schoolers to go into the Grand Staircase of a region of Utah on a 3-week backcountry experience, in which the youth were then, at the end of those 3 weeks, they had about 75 miles of backcountry under their belt. They took on unique leadership roles. Everybody was first aid trained. Everybody was assigned then, based on personal interests, to make themselves an expert in some area. We took art materials, we took literature with us. Many of the participants were so small that I wound up carrying the art supplies and the literature. So it was physically devastating, but really, really rich. And so that's my educational background. So what's that got to do with the mill and what's that got to do with Vicksburg is a really good and logical question. And so my experience with the mill, which I suppose I should give you a little bit of background because we've got some people coming from other spaces. The former Lee Paper Company mill over on the southwest side of the village is 420,000 square feet on 32 acres, on a 32-acre complex. Over the time that our friend Chris Moore, who now owns that property, has been in control of it, we've also then added an additional 80 acres west of that property, which is 25 of those 80 acres has ever only been used for agricultural purposes, and that's my sweet spot. That's where we're here. That's what we're here to learn about today. So this 420,000 square foot facility was originally opened in 1905, producing high quality paper made out of cotton rags. In the late 50s, they stopped using exclusively cotton in making the paper because with the advent of polyester, they couldn't always differentiate between natural material and polyester, and the heat that was generated in the paper making process melted the polyester and started gumming up the machines. So then they got into recycled office supplies and recycled paper. After a 97-year run, the mill was shut down, fairly unceremoniously is my understanding of it. And it sat for 14 years. And this is where I start to get involved. Chris Moore, who now owns the place, is a native Vicksburger, if that's a term. And Chris's family, on his mother's side, his greats were among the first Europeans into this area. They were among the first people to settle in the Kalamazoo area. So Chris's family has been in Vicksburg/Schoolcraft since 1829 or 30, maybe 31. So before Michigan was a state. His family ties to the mill then go back to his grandfather, who was the chief engineer. He was self-taught. He did that for over 30 years. Chris's father worked at the mill for over 30 years as a purchasing agent. Chris and his brother, just like so many people around here in this area, worked at the mill during high school and university years, kind of during break, to get additional money. So really, really deep ties to the whole mill experience. In 2014, Chris's mom called him and said, "Oh, you won't believe it, they're planning to pull down the mill." The mill, after being closed, went through a number of kind of false start business propositions, and including someone who just bought the mill to salvage everything that could be salvaged out of it. It had fallen off the tax brackets, it had fallen into, I guess receivership would be the word, and the county owned it. The county didn't know what to do with it, the land bank owned a portion of it, and so it was getting to the point where no one was able to do anything with the mill, so they were making plans to pull it down. Chris's mom called Chris and said, "You won't believe it, they're pulling the mill down." Chris said, "That's a shame. What do you think I should do about it?" "I don't know what to do about it." He went on a tour of the facility with Ken Skippers, the former village manager, wound up on the roof of the building looking out. The building is shaped like a horseshoe, looking out over the courtyard that the wings of the building create. And he went, this might be a pretty cool place to see a show. And then we got engaged in this whole thing. My wife and Chris are best friends from their time at University of Michigan. And so Chris started to tell Jackie, my wife, about the plans and the ideas that he had kind of spinning for this facility and this land. And she said, "Well, you know, that's really cool. I have to tell you, I'm pretty envious of this." He's like, "Don't be envious, you knucklehead. I'm not rubbing it in. I'm asking you to come and run the thing for me because Chris is in Seattle. He can't be here." So Jackie is the chief operating officer of this whole endeavor. And I am her kind of right-hand person, which is good because we are married, so that's helpful. So from day one, my stance on this, and it's got to be because of my educational background, is we've got this facility, we've got this land, and we have always known that it was inextricably stitched to Vicksburg in the region. And many of the plans that are being formulated for the rehabilitation of this mill property are very adult, but we're very family-centered. And so now we ask ourselves, how can we do this? And so I've been presenting, and it's been really received with open arms, the idea of creating the mill complex and the adjacent property as a sort of a learning lab that we could make available for the local schools. And so that's really how I got engaged. I didn't have a job when I moved here. I've basically written this job experience for myself, which is, I mean, really unique and a real privilege for me. So what we've been able to do is, through our visioning and our mission, we've always talked about creating a space for lifelong learners and building transparency into this space. So if you're making something at the mill, the craft beverage is going to be, I'll use that as an easy example. Craft beverage is going to be a major component of the operations of the mill, of a portion of the mill. Rather than just brewing beer and distilling spirits, we're creating an opportunity to make that transparent. So if you're there visiting as a conference attendee, if you're not in a conference, there will be activities that you'll be able to actually witness. There's nothing better than watching someone else work. And we know that. So that's kind of where we're at. So that's been a big focus. So how do we how do we get the schools and local learners then engaged? This is where this property comes in. Right now, the mill is such an active construction site that the local schools are very, very hesitant, rightfully so, to allow field trips into that space, because it's just, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of rehabilitation work that's been going on. It just wouldn't really be safe. The 80 acres, on the other hand, is wide open. And because it has only been, a big portion of it has only been ag land, this gives us a unique opportunity then to work with the local high school in particular, because the local high school is a magnet school. And its two main areas of focus are industrial arts and agriculture. And so, yeah.
What's industrial arts?
Industrial arts, it sounds really sexy, doesn't it?
It sounds like a really cool thing. But...
It's the manufacture. It's like CNC and like that kind of like the plastics manufacturing kind of thing. This is there's a lot of plastics manufacturing that goes on in this region of Michigan. And so it's kind of almost like a vocational tech kind of class or kind of focus. So it's preparing young people it's like a workplace readiness program run out of the school. And I've done some work with that, but that's another day's topic, less germane. So because we had control of this property, we were thinking thoughts as like, what could we do with this? And so we engaged Michigan State Extension Office, and we said, we're interested in maybe doing demonstration plots for cereal grains, because one of Chris's side ventures is a very successful brewery in Seattle called Old Stove Brewing Company. And so because of that, we know that we're going to be doing a lot of craft beverage and brewing at the site. We thought, well, gee, it'd be really cool if people who didn't have that experience could see cereal grains growing and could see what a modern hop trellis looks like, this sort of thing. And so we engaged Michigan State Extension, and the agent that we talked to was like, yeah, no farmer's going to buy into that. There's no way, because with an average test plot would be about the size of this room. And the ag agent was like, you know what? They can't even mobilize their equipment. Commercial farmers cannot mobilize their equipment even for the 16 acres that I've been able to carve out. There are very few farmers that are going to be into that kind of programming, and certainly not that scale. But you might consider going to Vicksburg High School because they've got that ag program, and they could get engaged with you. So the construction company that's working on the mill rehabilitation is local. It's in Vicksburg. It's Frederick Construction Company. Mike Frederick, the owner of that company, and Chris Moore went to high school together. Oh, synergy starts to emerge. So I'd mentioned my desire to do this to Mike Frederick. He said, oh, well, I'll get you in touch with Noreen Heikus from the high school. She's one of the teachers at the ag department. And so Mike and Noreen and I went out into this property, and her head exploded with opportunity. And I said, well, let's give ourselves a couple of weeks to think about what we saw. And we'll come back together and we'll see, we'll kind of compare notes. She showed up with 6 pages of single-spaced notes of ideas of things that could happen on that property. And so it was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, what could we do then? What's implementable? So what we devised was a sort of a curriculum, a year-long curriculum for her horticulture class. And it started with, we'll give you the 16 acres to play with. I want to start a pollinator habitat. What do you want to do? And so then she said, well, let's do an edible forest. An edible forest is permaculture. You plant fruit trees, you basically make a manicured space of trees and plants that produce food. And then you decide with whatever happens from it. Certainly I don't need apples and pears. I can go and buy apples and pears at the co-op, right? But what if we planted fruit trees that produced, and then if any of that fruit that was ever produced were of any sort of quality, that produce made its way back into the school or into the Generous Hands, our local kind of food bank organization. And that's where we took off. So now we start to think about, well, how does that look? That's okay, so the kids come out for a day or 2 days and they plant trees. That's not enough. That's not enough learning. So what then do we do? So what we devised was a sort of a curriculum where in the fall, students meet me. We talk a little bit about what's going on, about their role and their capacity, their opportunity to leave a lasting impression on the community through that space over at the mill. Then we start to talk about, you've got this space, we're going to plant maybe some fruit trees. You'll decide, you're the students, you decide, you're in charge. So they have to go through soil testing to see if there are any sort of remediation. They have to decide and present to their teacher and to me what varieties they want to plant. So the first year was pears and apples, and they wanted to do heirloom apples. Okay, what does that mean? What do we do? Where do we find these things? When you say heirloom, what varietals are those? So then they had to go through and they had to do that research. And then they had to create a care plan because most of those participants were seniors. They were going away. Those trees are not going away, I hope. So then what's going to happen then in the future to make this an ongoing situation? So they had to create a care plan. And then in the spring, they had to purchase the plants. They had to plant them. We had to protect them from deer. So now you're seeing some of these photographs of the youth working out in the field, and they're planting the taller trees, or the apple and pear trees, and they have to protect them from the deer. So that's what's going on a little bit with the high school. Now I'm going to jump forward to a couple of weeks ago. We got it in our heads that we wanted to reintroduce pawpaw trees onto the property. And if you know anything, do you know anything about pawpaws?
I do.
Speak.
Lupe Smith has one. She's had it for years.
Does it bear fruit?
Yes.
Is the fruit delicious?
Yes, but you have to pick it the right day.
Right, otherwise it's weird. It's only ripe for like that long, right?
Yes, I've heard, she loves to talk about her pawpaw trees.
Well-
She bought them out of state because there was nothing available in the state of Michigan.
Now there is. There's a nursery just southwest.
I have pawpaws on my property, actually. They were there when we bought them.
Okay.
All right,
They did not produce any fruit.
so check it out.
They normally do.
Pawpaw is a fascinating thing. There's a nursery that's got 35 varieties just south. Which is the little village, like, or little community, like southwest of Lansing that starts with the letter O? Is it Owasso? Owasso. I think it's Owasso.
Good feeling.
All right, so here's the thing about pawpaw trees. Pawpaw trees are legitimately tropical fruit.
Yeah. She's
They-
from Ecuador.
Well, these go back to the Cretaceous era before the last ice age. And when Michigan and this region was a tropical region. And somehow they managed to get through the last ice age. And now once upon a time, the range spanned from this area of Michigan down into Virginia. 5 states in that region have place names pawpaw. Go figure. They're kind of turning into the it fruit. I had a delicious pawpaw cider a couple of months ago in downtown Kalamazoo. There are people in Virginia who are propagating this fruit. We got it into our head, well, let's run with this. I mean, this is an indigenous fruit. It loves to have wet feet. It loves to be like near water. We've got a lot of standing water over there on the 80 acres. Let's go for it. And so we reintroduced then pawpaws onto that property a couple of weeks ago. This is the kind of learning that the youth are able to do. So that's what we're able to provide. You're seeing a lot of sunflowers and a lot of buckwheat in here. Let me talk about this for a little bit and a little bit of the beekeeping operation that's going on as well. So while we bump started this like, let's work with the high school and plant fruit trees, we also started working with the local commercial farmer, Rob Richardson, and his family, Richardson Farms. They're just a couple of miles down Silver Street. And yeah, they are. But this is really cool. So I contacted Rob and said, okay, I want to do this. He's like, well, let's have coffee and talk this over. I said, I want to start a pollinator habitat. He said, all right, we'll go through some options. Because he's a commercial farmer, this little 16-acre plot over here is adorable to him. And it's equally adorable that I set the stipulation of, Rob, we're as green as we can possibly be. This is going to be a no-spray facility. What will you think with me about? So he said, all right, first we decided we're going to stabilize. So we put daikon radish and oats. So we tilled all like 25 years of weed and seed and all this organic stuff, pulled out saplings that were like 4 inches across, cleared the field, and just turned it loose. And then we stabilized it. The next year, and by the way, the daikon radishes that they plant to like break the hard pan, delicious. They're like legit daikon radishes. They make great pickles. The greens are awesome in salads.
They planted that on their property out by us too.
Go grab them before it frosts.
Well,
The-
they tilled them under.
Oh, you're bumming. Yes, sir.
What did you put those 2 elements in for? What-
Because the soil needed to be stabilized. Daikon grows to be about this long when it's really hitting its stride. And so it breaks through hard pan soil.
Okay.
And so it starts to kind of aerate. It also is designed to just be left in the ground when it frosts, so all of that organic material then starts to nourish the soil.
Did you then plow it under?
Yeah, but it also grows quickly enough that it outruns the weeds,
Oh, okay.
which is critical when you've got a 25-year seed bank of weeds. And so we did that for a season. And then we had another coffee date. We have a lot of coffee dates, and they're really fun. We had another coffee date, and I was like, okay, so now pollinator. He's like, well, commercial farmer, we could plant buckwheat, that's a nitrogen fixer, and we can plant sunflowers because they're really dramatic.
Now, does the buckwheat return nitrogen to the soil,
Correct, yes.
like alfalfa?
Yeah, it's kind of legumish.
Mm-hmm.
And so it holds on to nitrogen. And so we thought, well, we'll just rotate back and forth. We'll do 8 acres of sunflowers. Next year, we'll move those forward. We'll move the buckwheat backward. First year, worked like a charm. Buckwheat's this tall, sunflowers are this tall. You see the photographs. It's really, really photogenic. If you've never seen a field of buckwheat, when it's in full roar, firstly, it's alive with pollinators. Secondly, it smells like root beer. It's magical. First year, I thought, well, geez, this is easy. I mean, everything worked, right? The next year, we get a hailstorm. The sunflowers are this tall. The kids are all like posing with photos of the sunflowers. None of the buckwheat comes up. The third year, nothing comes up. I was like, this is for the birds. I went, Rob, what's going on? He said, well, you know, that's farming. It's like, well, farming is hard. He's like, now you know this? So, so I sat with him and we decided, okay, let's go in a different direction here. There's no need for them to continue to come out and plant these commercial crops. What could we do that would allow us to create a pollinator habitat that wouldn't look like this, that would be like a broader spectrum ecosystem support? And so we moved into field grasses that grow very quickly, still outrunning the weeds. And we moved into then 3 types of flowering clover. And that's where we are now. The clover still is a nitrogen fixer. It's giving back to the land. It's this happiest little knee-high field of lush green. When you walk through it, it smells, it's emerald. It smells beautiful. It's awesome. So that's where we are. Over the course of this then, are we supporting pollinators? And is that message getting into the schools? Yes, it is. How do we know that? Because Vicksburg High School last year just installed its first apiary, its first beehive out on the property. Prior to that, we had a commercial beekeeping operation that did like a partial season, and they were able to generate 75 pounds the first year of the most incredible, deep, dark buckwheat honey that you've ever seen that actually tastes a little bit like molasses. It's just remarkable. So this is you see now the youth are actually starting to work with the apiary. When you see the beehive that's painted white and decorated, that's a class project. And so that was part of last year's horticulture and also pre-vet, because if I don't give you enough fun facts to know and or yell today, this is the one to take away. Bees are considered by the USDA to be livestock, which is really cool to think about. So now they're part of their vet tech training. There's a field in veterinary science devoted entirely to pollinators. Brilliant. So now these vet tech students at the local high school are working with these beehives. The beehive, by the way, is really cool. It's run, when it's time to harvest honey, you don't actually disturb the combs. It's actually run with a series of Allen keys, and the Allen keys will shift the comb enough to shear off the face of it, and it just drains the honey out of the comb. So you don't disturb the bees. The bees just hang out. They're like, where's everything going? But it's not. Yeah, because I got to harvest. I did a bucket listy thing the first year, and actually got to harvest honey. And the beekeepers didn't quite tell me how to actually wear the bee suit. So they got up in there. Oh my God.
Nothing better than a trapped bee.
Oh, how about a dozen trapped bees? They lit me up. Anyway, another day's topic. Another day's topic. So what are we doing looking forward? And we're at the point now where we're in the home stretch here. So looking forward, we're continuing this relationship with the high school. We're doing this kind of commercial beekeeping operation. We're working with the nicest Willis Farms honey. Just saying, shameless plug. So what else is cooking? Well, thanks for asking. Good question. So last February, I got contacted by a PhD candidate in the forestry department at Michigan State. By the way, remind me to talk a little bit about what we're doing with Western too. But heard from this forester from Michigan State, and he gave me this background. His job is fascinating. Remember when we had ash trees? It survived?
You gotta treat it every other year.
I was going to say, guard it, like hold it like a member of the family.
In the neighborhood, we've been treating it for 10 years.
So Evan's job is to basically go from the Muskegon River up to the tip of the Keweenaw. That forest canopy from the big woods. Having grown up in Muskegon, I kind of look at that river as kind of like the beginning of the big woods in Michigan. And so that forest canopy is over 90% sugar maple. And so his operating premise is that they are one parasite or one blight infestation away from devastation of the forest. So he's looking at ways to diversify the forest canopy. His side hustle is related to the American chestnut. Do you know anything about the American? Oh, speak.
I remember my dad used to tell me stories when I was a little girl. We had an American chestnut stump in our backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And he would take me out there and tell me about what happened to the American chestnut and how the blight just devastated it.
Yeah.
And about every third year, a shooter tries to grow up
Yep,
from that stump.
yep.
And it gets about yay tall and then it dies.
And all right, I'm going to fill in the blanks. Before Europeans on this continent, between the Mississippi and the Mid-Atlantic states, over 90% of the forest canopy was American chestnut. Huge trees, huge, referred to as the eastern redwood. They're so big. As population numbers grew, people started to import chestnut trees then from other areas of the world, from Asia. Some of the stock from China had a blight that American chestnut trees were not prepared for, and they girdled the tree, and this is why you still have that stump in the yard, or had that stump in the yard that still...
I think it's still there. I don't know if it still produces shoots, but I think the stump's still there.
So the blight girdles the tree, and as it girdles the tree, it creates oxalic acid, and it basically burns the top of the tree up. And that's what happens to the top of the tree. It doesn't kill the rootstock. And that's why that stump continues to bolt, because the blight is not in there. Then when it bolts, the blight is still on the stump of the tree. It jumps on that and it dies. That's what's going on. So we all have this kind of like mental image about genetically modified organisms, right? This is something that is actually messing with my head a little bit. So I'm talking with Evan from MSU, and he's like, yeah, you know, I got engaged with these people from West Virginia, and they are working on reestablishing the American chestnut tree on the Appalachian mountains that have been subjected to coal mining practices that would strip the mountaintop bare and just like denude the thing of all of its, and all those tailings are magnificently toxic, and they're really, really super destructive, right? So there's a group of scientists in that area that are working on reintroducing American chestnuts into that space to actually reforest those mountains. In order to do that, they have devised a way to genetically modify chestnut pollen, changing 4 genomes with genomes from wheat that will actually, when you fertilize the fruit of those chestnut trees, then the pollen, and I'm getting bogged down here, my mind is whipping. The pollen then, that tree that is now blight resistant, actually changes oxalic acid into hydrogen peroxide. And so Evan got fired up on that. He's got some space. He grew up in Newaygo, up in my stomping grounds. And he's got access to a little bit of Michigan State property up there. He's got 1,000 American chestnut tree saplings. And he's looking now for places to put those saplings. We had him out to the mill property, out onto the 80 acres. He met with Noreen Heikas. We're like, this is it. This is going to be a great high school experience. We thought that we would actually have 100 or so of those saplings transplanted onto the mill property this fall, and we decided to wait until next spring. So hopefully these things will overwinter well. So what's going to happen? So we'll have a grove of American chestnut trees out on the property. We're going to be participating in this reintroduction. Interesting thing to think about in terms of climate change, agricultural zones have all moved a zone north because of climate change. This area was never chestnut property before. Over closer to the Detroit area, that was kind of a thing, but never here. Now, because of climate change, this is wheelhouse. And what they're finding out now, they've got these trees growing in West Virginia. They love growing on this really poor soil, on these this awful tailing kind of stuff. So we're working with Evan from Michigan State. We're going to get 100 or so of these trees. That first generation of trees is doomed. His speculation is that it'll take 25 or so years for the blight to find the trees, but it will find the trees. What's going on is, in parallel to that genetically modified pollen is working its way through governmental
Regulation.
Thank you. Words escape me. I've been talking a lot. So that pollen is going through the regulatory process. And by the time it goes through the process, we anticipate that those trees will be flowering and bearing fruit, and they'll be making a beautiful canopy. They're doomed. 25 years, those trees are going to get found by the blight. In the interim, they'll be making generations. Chestnut trees are like oak trees. They make fruit every year. And so the coming generations of those trees will then be able to be pollinated with this genetically modified pollen that will then start to create generations of increasingly blight-resistant trees. So the mill, fingers crossed, is going to be engaged in reintroducing American chestnut trees. And we talk about it, the mill being a 200-year process. That's a 200-year process. I have no illusion that I will be here when those trees die. It's just, you should see my lifestyle. But that's what we have. So those are the things that we're working with. Thinking about Western, and this will be the last thing that I'll mention, and then we can open it up for questions, and we'll get out of here by 3 o'clock. You'll get home in plenty of time to have the lion's heart break your heart again. So Western Michigan University has a world-renowned hydrogeology department. And
What is that?
Hydrogeology? Excellent question. I really don't know. Hydrogeology is the study of water and water systems. So what happens is that they have a couple of 6-month programs every summer in which they have students, learners from all over the world come to Kalamazoo, and a few of those days of those 6 weeks, they're out on the mill property, and they are hand augering test wells out on the property, out in the pollinator habitat. in which they will be able to monitor, like they could put a pump head down in those wells and pump water out of it for 24 hours, 7 days a week for a while, and then they'll stop and they'll see how fast the water table will recover. They're able to then, like these are the people that are environmental scientists that will track the movement of plumes of pollution from contaminated sites into other areas and that sort of thing. So they're water quality experts. Western Michigan has been working with us for over 5 years in doing their hydrogeology work out at the mill as well. So we're tapping away. So that's a hell of a lot of information. What wasn't I clear about? What have you seen that gave you questions? What do you want to know more about?
Well, I have a little question regarding, you bring these students in and give them all of the farm techniques, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when they graduate, where do they go from there?
Well, you know,
What is their, I guess, their internal education that will help them in real life and work and in other environments?
that's such a good question, and it's really, I'm very new. This is all very new. So I don't know how they parlay what they're doing here into any future endeavors. I think that if Noreen were here, she would say that these are kids that traditional classrooms don't really work for.
Well,
And
that's
that,
what I was going to ask next.
yeah,
You know, everybody isn't doomed to go to college, and yet we've said,
Agreed.
you gotta go to college. Now we need people that are not college trained, like welders or bricklayers.
and these are the industrial arts that we were talking about earlier. So what I can say then is that what we're looking at is the next generation of farmers. And the next generation of farmers are actually going to be as high tech as any tech industry.
They're already pretty.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like 2 years ago, we had that big thing with the Cultural Arts Center. It was a celebration of farming in America. And a couple of the local, a couple of the farmers brought some big John Deere equipment, and the stuff drives itself.
Yeah.
They literally type in coordinates, and the thing will drive straight furrows out and back, and the operator just sits in the cab and texts.
And he's air conditioned.
Yeah,
It actually calculates how much for each acre how much fertilizer you put down, how much rain you're getting off of it, or whatever you're pulling off.
Mhm.
It calculates how much you need to reapply in the spring. Yeah, they're insane. But
Yeah.
they're also all owned by John Deere.
right.
I mean,
And it's,
the farmers rent them. They don't really.
well, because where are you going to come up with $600,000 for a tractor? More?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So,
But no, they own the technology. So even
Sure.
if you own the tractor, you.
right, it's all proprietary, and they can pull that software anytime they want. Now, excuse me, just for a sec, in following with that, and it's my mind is like a sieve. I'm gonna get there. I might get there.
Feel like a Lone Ranger.
Huh?
Don't feel like a Lone Ranger. We all have that problem.
I'm going to come back to it because there's something I wanted to bring up about. Oh, I know what it is. Hops. I mentioned hops earlier, and then I'll get to your questions as well. So, in talking with Michigan State, hops. So, in making beer, there are over 400 breweries in Michigan. There are over 9,000 breweries in the United States now. In talking with Michigan State, we know in order to make beer, you need water, you need yeast, you need barley, you need hops. And yeast kind of manages itself. There's a very, very cool, unusual lab up in the UP that is manufacturing native yeast strains for Michigan, for the Michigan brewing industry. Barley, back in the old days, before Prohibition, there were 800,000 acres of barley, malting barley, grown in Michigan alone a year, primarily for Stroh's. Now there are about 8,000. Barley is a very, very finicky crop. It is very susceptible to fungus. You can take a perfectly good crop of barley, add fungus to it, and you've made something that not even animals can eat. And the brewing industry is very finicky about the amount of protein that the barley, that malting barley can contain. If you don't meet that threshold, you've taken something that sells for about $8 a bushel and turned it into animal food that sells for about $2.50 a bushel. So it's a really, really risk-intensive thing. Hops is much less risk-intensive. However, according to Michigan State, to grow hops, the infrastructure, because hops is a rhizome that'll grow to like 18 to 25 feet tall. And so you have to make this overhead infrastructure for it. That's about $10,000 to $15,000 an acre to create the infrastructure. Hops, by the way, is fascinating. In the middle of July, when hops is really thrumming, it'll grow like 8 inches a day. You can almost watch the stuff grow. You can almost hear it growing. It's amazing. It's an amazing plant. So we've been kind of sniffing around with Frederick Construction and Schoolcraft High School because they have a construction trades program at their high school. We want to marry that construction trades program with this ag program at Vicksburg High and build a little hops trellis so that these young people recognize that agriculture is not the stereotype that you think it might be. Agriculture is a very, very there's a great opportunity for a lucrative career in agriculture that might not necessarily mean you ever get into a tractor. I mean, $10,000 an acre, that's not materials costs. And hops is a huge growing industry. And hops are so sought after in the brewing industry that now small breweries are forced into signing contracts that would you have to sign like 5-year contracts speculating about what types, what varieties of hops you need or what might be hot within the brewing industry. It's a total crapshoot. Brewing is extremely volatile as an industry. Tastes change constantly. So anyway, so that's, what can you do?
Well, that answers my question. There's a lot of opportunities for these young people then to get in these different areas of agriculture. I mean, not just growing oats and wheat and corn.
Yeah,
all
yeah.
these other modalities. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Liz, you had a question
Oh, I
earlier.
was just going to ask, generally, you talked about pollution, and I wondered if you've discovered any at the mill. Paper factories have generated a lot of...
They were notoriously bad polluters. The mill is much less, the mill property is much less polluted than you would imagine.
Good.
There are some dioxins in the creek. We're exploring with Eagle how to restore the creek to pre-industrial state, including putting some kinks back into it, reintroducing fish habitat, that sort of thing. Eagle didn't know how to handle a question like that because normally when they're approached, it's like, what's the minimum I have to do? Not, we want to kick this thing's butt, what can we do?
How will that affect the little...
The snuff box mussels?
whatever they were coming, the Cajun...
Oh, the crawfish?
crawfish, yeah.
Oh, I don't know about I can't speak of the crawfish. It is
not, maybe they're not even near the mill property, but...
Oh, I just don't know. I don't know. I can't even speculate about that.
Are
John?
they in Michigan yet?
Oh yeah, they're in Sunset Lake.
Really?
Yeah.
I just read an article that, and they didn't say where they were to yet.
Yeah.
Folks from down south came up here after they were discovered up here, and they showed us how to cook our crawfish.
Yeah. One of our friends was the person who actually identified the crawfish scuttling across the road. So, John?
When you talked about, you're growing these fruit trees
Yeah.
and then developing a plan to, I forget the word you used,
The care plan, yeah.
the care plan for these, that, you know, there's a lot of insects, there's a lot of treatment,
Yeah.
you know, the type of bug killers for less.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And so, what are your thoughts on how to do that without, you know, does that work with bees, you know, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
how does that affect that sort of thing? What kind of, you know, environmental citizen,
yeah.
things are you using to do that?
So as a no spray facility, we've been told that they're like good luck growing apples that don't have bugs. We've been working from day one with Scott Paquin, who is like he's made himself an expert on permaculture, and his contention is that beneath the trees themselves, you can create plantings that will facilitate the growth or whatever, that will actually entice insects that will counter those insects. So you create this like little battleground where the insects that would get into the fruit are waging war with the insects that eat the insects that bore into fruit. And so that's a crapshoot, and who knows if that's going to work, but that's what we're going to try.
That's a part of your plan.
Yeah.
So you won't be using chemicals?
No, sir.
I didn't think you would.
It's really all about biodiversity. Our country is that the only way, like the big farmers he's talking to, they only do monoculture. That's why they have to use so many sprays, because they're monoculturing all the farmland. The more you diversify what you're growing, the less pest pressure you have, because they can't identify where that smell is coming from. So if you put, like I do, companion planting is what it's called, and smaller stuff. I put basil and dill and everything else I plant that with my tomatoes and stuff, because it makes it less, I still get tomato worms, but I don't get nearly as many. I had about 70 plants last year, and I had like 8 tomato worms. So
Yeah. So you're confusing the hell out of them, basically.
They confuse the pollen, and then the more diversity you bring in with all of the natural pollinator plants, and like I put in coneflowers this year and stuff, the more of those you bring in, the more beneficial insects you bring in, the more beneficial insects you have, the less pest pressure you have. That does take about probably 5 years to see like a noticeable impact, but I've been at my place for 6 years, and I can say this year I've seen a huge impact, and last year were a huge impact on the kind of beneficial insects I was seeing.
Yeah.
So I had a huge butterfly population this year. It's really
Well, congratulations. That's huge. I like your odds. You're going to do all right.
What about birds?
I believe in birds. Actually, oh my gosh, thank you for asking. So my coworker Elise Thomas this last summer had this brilliant idea of, let's take little kids out on the mill like over the summer. We'll take them out onto the 80 acres and let them run around, and we'll give them a scavenger hunt and a map and turn them loose. And then we got engaged with the Vicksburg Cultural Arts Center, and after those walks over on the 80 acres, we came over back to the pavilion on the other side of the mill, and they did arts projects with the Cultural Arts Center. One of those projects, I'm really into bats because I don't like mosquitoes. I'm really into wood ducks because they're beautiful, and I'm really into bluebirds because they're spectacular. And so I pushed Elise to find bat houses, wood duck houses, and bluebird houses for out on the mill property, because bluebirds love a pasture, bats love a forest, wood ducks love marsh. So it's wheelhouse. So we bought these houses, turned them over to the Cultural Arts Center. The Cultural Arts Center turned them into arts projects for the kids who went on our nature walks. And now those are up on Facebook for auction from the 8th until the 15th of November, I believe. And so, yeah, so when we talk about this changing...
Are any of them in?
Oh, they're all installed, John. They're cool as
I
hell.
thought you were I thought you put them on for auction.
They're installed. You can sponsor. The auction is to sponsor the box. Yeah. But when you talk about when I spoke earlier about the diversification of the ecosystem by going into more into the clover and the field grasses, that's the kind of diversity that we're embracing. That's what we have. That's what we've been digging into. And so now, I can't wait to see how many bluebirds are going to show up there. I tried last year unsuccessfully to create a bird feeder cam last winter, where like I put a bird feeder cam. So like I set up a camera, put a bird feeder out, and then just live stream the thing 24/7. But there's more to that than I had anticipated. So anyway, hey, it's a little after 3. Last swing of the bat?
Do you currently, you talked about a little bit about
My tummy's
restoring your waterways. On the
Yeah,
property. Do you
yeah.
currently have a contact for what your next step is in that direction?
We've been working with 2 consulting groups. One of them is a childhood friend of Chris's who lives in Idaho right now. His name is Andy Scott, and I can't think of the other one, but yes, we've been working with these restoration,
Okay.
with like aquatics experts.
My aunt lives in Grand Haven. She's a registered landscape architect,
Oh, how cool.
and she specializes in wetland regulatory issues.
Oh, you may see the bat signal going up at some point. I think we've got that in hand with these consultants.
Yeah,
But-
probably. I was just curious.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah, because they yell at us every time we trim a tree.
Right, yeah. Yeah. It's like, I don't know that much about what she does, but I know she's described before that if a company wants to put a building up and there's a wetland involved, she's one who'll come in and tell them what they can and can't do.
Oh, right, yeah. We got those people.
I'm sure you do. But she also works with the Ottawa County Parks, doing all kinds of projects with the parks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I wish I had more time. I'd tell you how the summer I spent working at the Grand Haven Parks and Rec. Code word, what happened to the tailgate off this pickup truck? Anyway, that's all. So, tell you what, Charlie's been, your time is precious. Khalid's time is precious. As I'm packing up, I think you have another question, you can pop on up and say, last chance to swing a bat. Then I thank you all so much for
Thank you.
for your generosity. Thank you.